No vox signal ever bore the first scream. No astropathic vision carried the moment when Fornax Aleph slipped from the coil of the Imperium's knowing. There was no war, no uprising, no transmission of panic across the black. There was only stillness, a stillness that did not end. Fornax Aleph did not shimmer with the grandeur of worlds consecrated to martyrdom or glory. It bore no relics of saints, no battle-scarred basilica, no war zone to sharpen heroism. Its value lay in sheer output. Hive-born flesh, manufactorum labour, regiments by the 100,000. A furnace world, indistinct among so many, it served as a blood reservoir for the Sabbat world's crusade. Its compliance had never lapsed. Its devotion was unremarkable and unwavering. The kind of world no one remembered until it stopped answering. Beneath the hive spires, the tithe quotas were met without incident. The flesh-rationing engines ran smooth. The transit columns moved without celebration. And then, they didn't. The anomaly took no single shape. Administratum logs began to stutter with omissions. Deployment manifests lost entire battalions to clerical void. Fleet-picked feeds of Fornax Aleph arrived blank, not distorted, but pristine and empty, like a stage meticulously set with no cast to play the drama. Logisticians at Crusade High Command began to circle the data in red ink and silence. Fornax Aleph was not failing to respond. It was simply no longer accounted for in the patterns of cause and effect. There had been no orbital bombardment, no insurrection codes, no demonic flares or psychic wounds blooming across astropathic relays. But the world had grown uninhabited. Without declaring its descent, it had slipped into disappearance. From the bastions of Fortis Binary to the data crypts beneath Herodor, officers and savants began to murmur the same pattern. A populated world that did not behave as one. It consumed no rations, issued no orders, requested no reinforcement. Its own guard regiments, 52 in total, had not been heard from since their redeployment west of the Jago margin. Their fleet elements still existed in theoretical muster rolls, but no signal returned from their designated coordinates. The world spun. Its surface appeared unchanged, but its heartbeat was missing. The order came from Segmentum Command under Cipher Lock. It bore the designation Operation Rake, ostensibly a reclamation action, quiet, precise, routine. Colonel Dravera of the 87th Urdashi Armoured was given tactical lead. His orders named no enemy. They described no resistance. His forward to command simply read, Fornax Aleph remains open to occupation. No contact with surface since last logistic registration. Hive functions observed on satellite relay. Populous status unknown. Proceed. The 87th deployed in full combat readiness with no target. What they found was not a battlefield. It was a world fully intact and unpeopled. Hive Primaris stood as if the workforce had stepped out for a break and never returned. Train lines still clicked in ghost rhythm. Conveyor belts crawled along their loops, unburdened by flesh. Chapel bells rang in intervals set by ancient cogitators. The Mechanicus found data looms still updating population metrics, but registering negative birth rates, zero death tallies, and constant nominal output. The effect spread like rot without stench. Hive Secundus, Tertius, and the orbital bastion Halone Beta all mirrored the same phenomenon. Infrastructure untouched, activity ceased. Power grids hummed, lights blinked, and in all that unbroken mechanical persistence, there was no human presence. Not corpses, not blood, not even bone. The world was clean. Too clean. Some began to speculate. Others refused to record their thoughts. Redrake's initial dispatches returned without annotation. Recon squads were issued auditory dampeners not to protect against noise, but to suppress the drone of endless silence. Those who walked the empty manufactoria reported hearing footsteps behind them. Always just one step too far to turn and see. These reports were not logged. There was no warfare. There were no ruins. There was no plague. There was only absence where multitudes should have stood. No alarms were raised in the first weeks. That was the first true vanishing, not of people, but of urgency. The mechanisms of Imperial record failed to escalate. Fear did not propagate, it diffused. A slow acceptance fell over the operation, an instinctive submission to the unreality of what had occurred, as though the truth could be preserved so long as no one spoke it aloud. But there was still one certainty, whispered only among the inquisitorial retinues that shadowed Red Rake's command. Fornax Aleph had not been attacked. Fornax Aleph had been collected. What did the collecting? None dared say. Yet even then, beneath the domed stillness of Hive Pyrexis, something remained. Something unabsent. The order that bore the name Redrake passed into command channels like an inoculation, discreet, potent, and meant to prevent something that none dared name. It was not billed as an escalation. No formal declaration of crisis accompanied it. The Inquisition did not make itself visible. No saint's image adorned the briefing scrolls. This was an operation framed in logistical terms, a cleanup, a sweep, a redeployment. But those who received the order knew otherwise. Colonel Dravere, commanding officer of the 87th Urdeshi Armoured, did not believe in ghosts. He believed in kill zones, fuel reserves, and overlapping fields of fire. He did not speak often of Fornax Aleph beyond the operation's encoded manifest, but he read the margins. He saw the patterns. His regimental tasking had come not from the Crusade's high strategos, but from a data blind routed directly through Sectoris Obscurus, a branch line used only when deniability was required. He said nothing. He deployed. Redrake began on the third day of 774 M41. No fanfare marked the departure, only the silence of strategic omens. First to drop were the survey platoons, Urdeshi infantry stripped of heavy armour, outfitted for deep recon through Hive terrain. The deployment logs are still preserved in the crypt vaults beneath Balhaut, though much has been redacted. Names have been scraped away, designations smudged to grey, but some fragments remain. One reads, "Landing successful, Hive Primaris undamaged, no signs of defensive engagement, population centres at 0.0, atmospheric trace within HAB zones shows trace organics, power active, Vox dead, confirming no resistance, proceeding inward." Then, nothing. Hours passed. Then a second team followed, this time from the 709th Vervenhive Grenadier Cohort. They were instructed to descend into Hive Secundus, an equatorial sister spire long since repurposed as a mechanized depot for Crusade ordnance. Records show the deployment was by the book, insertion via Valkyrie pattern Arvus, sweep formations staggered at 7-meter intervals, Auspex drones deployed. Again, no return. By the 6th day of Redrake, 6 platoons had been committed. By the 12th, the number had tripled. No contact, no confirmed casualties, no signal interference, just absence. Only the surface Vox relays continued to register life signs. That was the deepest contradiction. Fornax Aleph's data bastions insisted life persisted within the hives. They counted footsteps, measured heat signatures, registered the pulse of bodies in motion, and yet, the boots on the ground found only echoes. The Auspex confirmed it. Every passage was clear, every corridor washed in sterile light. Some troopers claimed they could smell recent meals in the air, amino paste left cooling on heat trays, protein recyclers half full with uneaten ration slurry. Power still routed to elevator systems. Lifts ascended when called, but the top floors never opened. Dravere changed his strategy. Redrake's second phase employed armoured divisions, Chimera convoys and Baneblade support units. If the silence would not be broken by scouts, then it would be crushed beneath tracks. The Urdeshi 87th rolled through Hive Tertius like a phalanx through ghost bone. Turret gunners swept their sectors. Vox officers signalled repeatedly. Still nothing responded. That is when the first signals arrived, not from survivors, but from command squads already presumed dead. Encrypted codes pinged against orbital Vox. Regiment tags verified. But the source data was corrupted, their coordinates non-Euclidean, fluctuating across sectors like grav waves misaligned. When triangulated, the signals always resolved to the same location. Hive Primaris, sub-level 77, a maintenance sector not included in official cartographs. Colonel Dravere ordered a descent. 3 regiments entered the tunnels. They mapped 39 kilometers of substructure, encountered no enemies, no obstacles, no terrain instability. They logged over 200 hours of operable power lines, fully functional conveyor systems, and over 4,000 working lumen fixtures. All functioned without maintenance. Servitors found still running showed no sign of human oversight, no command link, no source of authority. Then the hallucinations began. The term hallucination appears only in personal field logs. The official campaign reports use a different phrase, perceptual corruption. Troopers began to report anomalies in the walls, faces in rivets, murmuring noises from dry conduits, reflections that did not match the angle of approach. Some claimed to see civilians, wandering silently across mezzanine bridges or crouched in alcoves, naked, blindfolded, marked with scripture in languages not recognized by Crusade lexica. No contact was made. Attempts to pursue these figures always resulted in the figure vanishing around corners that did not exist on the blueprints. At least 4 squads were lost to pursuit. The Vox began to fail again. But this time it wasn't silence. This time they could hear something. Not voices, not screams, just breathing. Thousands of overlapping breath patterns. Shallow, rhythmic, syncopated with the hive's power drone. The noise came from below, always below. The 3rd phase of Red Rake was never approved by Crusade Command. Colonel Dravere authorized it under Emergency Codex, invoking the Varn Inflection Doctrine, an obscure procedural protocol that permitted senior officers to act in full capacity of an inquisitorial mandate when Imperial reality was no longer coherent. Few have ever invoked it. Fewer survived. Dravere led the final descent himself. The last signal he sent was a simple one. Not tactical, not strategic. No orders, no maps. Only this: Hive Primaris is not empty. It remembers. We are inside something's memory. Nothing further was received. Operation Redrake was not declared terminated. It was never declared at all. The records halt. The logs cease. The next notation in the Sabbat World's Crusade ledger is the rerouting of 5 replacement guard regiments to an unnamed world for reclassification and disposition. That world's name is never recorded, but the coordinates match only one place. Beneath the smog-thickened skies of Fornax Aleph, the hives endured. Their silhouettes cut the horizon like broken crowns: Primaris, Secundus, Pyrexus, and Volan's spine, each a layered tomb that once breathed with trillions of souls. But there were no riots, no sieges, no secessionist declarations or chaos iconography scrawled in desperation across steel. There was only the eerie persistence of function. The lights stayed on. The elevators cycled. The railways still moved freight that no longer needed transport. And inside, something was watching. The first wave of Red Rake had sent back silence. The second returned ghosts. But it was in the 3rd wave, just before the collapse of all contact, that the hollowing was understood, not as an absence, but as a method, a process. Fornax Aleph had not fallen. It had been emptied, and the city spires, those cathedral hives of industry and worship, had not crumbled. They had been preserved. Everything had been left too intact. Imperial Guard recon sections entered habitation zones where rationing units still distributed weekly nutrient slop into perfectly aligned bowls. They discovered hab chambers in orderly states of departure, blankets turned down, Vox units still displaying serial dramas, children's toys left aligned by the foot of sleeping mats. Medical stations logged the arrival of patients who never showed. Data slates displayed sermon schedules for cathedra where no priest had spoken for weeks. The hives were not abandoned in panic. They had been walked out of, as if summoned elsewhere in total, wordless coordination. All at once, every hive yielded the same tableau. No signs of violence, no signs of coercion, no bodies, no scorch marks, no cultic residue. The Mechanicus, upon their own investigations, submitted that the machine spirits had not been violated. that Fornax Aleph remained structurally pure. But something had been taken, and that theft bore the unmistakable shape of human life. The most disturbing signs came from the vox chapels and shrine cloisters. In Hive Volan's spine, missionaries of the Ministorum uncovered sanctuaries left mid-ritual. Incense still burned in half-spent censers. Auto-recital units repeated litanies that no longer had listeners. Candles dripped wax onto marble shaped by forgotten martyrs' bones. One detachment reported a baptismal pool still warm to the touch, with vestments folded neatly nearby. But the holiest relics, those tied to the identity of the hives, were missing. Not looted, not desecrated. Missing. Nameplates, gene records, memorial vaults, identity documentation. Entire vaults of archived familial DNA had been scrubbed. Biometric access codes had been overwritten to nothing. This was not simply a disappearance of people, it was the erasure of presence itself. And still, through it all, the hives remained operational. Security cogitators functioned. Power levels remained stable. Infrastructure carried on as if billions of hands were still maintaining it. As if the city had forgotten it was hollow. Some guard elements succumbed to this illusion. Mid-tier command logs include chilling notations of platoons assigning sectors to patrol where none remained, or rationing food to non-existent civilians. One Vervenhive captain rewrote his own deployment manifest to reflect full civilian compliance, then requisitioned medical treatment for imaginary casualties. They did not behave as if mad, they behaved as if populated. In rare moments of lucidity, some survivors claimed to hear activity in adjacent rooms. Others glimpsed figures passing down bulkhead corridors. But always, when investigated, there was only silence. Picked feeds revealed nothing. Audio logs yielded looped environmental hum. And still, the reports continued. And then, the more disturbing phenomena began. One squad from the 87th Urdeshi, while exploring a collapsed agri-processing mezzanine, found a room that was not on the blueprints. Inside, they found hundreds of pairs of boots. Guard issue, standard Fornax PDF pattern, arranged in precise rows. Each pair pointed toward a blank wall. Each boot bore a name etched into the inner sole. All names matched the personnel logs of units long listed as missing in action. When the data was extracted and cross-referenced by Munitorum tacticians, a pattern emerged. Each name corresponded to regiments deployed off-world in the decades prior. Regiments whose fates had been presumed lost to warp storm, attrition, or bureaucratic error. Regiments who had nothing to do with Fornax Aleph. Their boots were here, and not a single guardsman had ever returned to claim them. The question was no longer what had happened to the people of Fornax Aleph. The question became, what was bringing them back? Because the footprints in the dust were fresh. By the 40th day of Operation Redrake, the Imperium's presence on Fornax Aleph resembled neither an occupation nor an expedition. It had become a ritual. Movement without meaning. Orders given without expectation of receipt. The Imperial Guard no longer advanced. They traced old steps, revisited cleared sectors, redrew maps they knew were wrong, and wrote names in logs that would never be seen again. The names vanished anyway. That, in time, became the axes of horror. Not the deaths, for there were no bodies. Not the corruption, for there was no blood. But the erasure. The subtle, unstoppable unraveling of record, of identity, of memory. It began at the unit level. Squad sergeants awoke unable to recall the names of their own men. Commissars found their prayer rolls shortened, versus missing lines where names once slotted between martyrdoms. A quartermaster reported that every trooper in his command roster bore the same designation, no entry. At first it was dismissed as cogitator malfunction, but soon the effect spread to Vox archives, picked records, biometric keys. Entire battalions were listed as void. Then came the reports of uniform anomalies. Troopers reported discovering their own flak jackets reissued to other men, names scrubbed, bloodstains removed, regimental sigils altered by minute degrees. The double-headed Aquila rendered with one head closed, the other open. Rank bars faded, dog tags worn smooth. One unit found a line of fully marked grave plots outside Hive Perexus, bearing names of guardsmen still alive and on active duty. They tried to exhume the graves. They found ashes, each urn sealed, each one marked with an administratum purity seal dated 7 years in the future. Some began to crack, others hardened into ritual. The faithful clung to the Lectitio Divinitatus. Some burned their own names onto their armor in Promethean black. Entire companies began inscribing liturgies of memory across their transport hulls. I am here, I serve, I remain. Yet still the deletion advanced. Back aboard the Crusade fleet, orbital scribes encountered anomalies in transmission logs. Names of Red Rake personnel were no longer being indexed. Vox traffic was received with no signature. Orders arrived addressed to officer. Some ships ceased to receive updates entirely. Entire departments in the Munitorum requested reassignment, citing non-responsiveness in known reality constructs. The Inquisition responded by invoking Protocol Infractum. A purge directive was quietly issued, coded through Ordo Obscurus channels. It read, "Where history fails, containment must proceed through denial. Operation Redrake is to be reclassified under Reclamation Doctrine 89N. All associated logs to be extracted, cipher-sealed, and archived under temporal lockdown. The Fornax cluster is to be removed from active navigational charts. Personnel lost to the vanishings are not to be recovered. They are to be unremembered." The final footnote of the Red Rake campaign exists in the memory of a single man, an attached commissar by the name of Gesson Tolv. No rank, no honours, no reassignments. His name does not appear in the formal Sabbath Crusade rolls. He appears only once more, years later, as a silent witness in an inquisitorial tribunal held aboard the Vigilantum Solex, a ship long since decommissioned. His testimony was not spoken aloud. It was written by hand, locked in a lead-lined prayer box, and sealed within the Taurus crypt of an executioner's chapel. The final words read, "The ashes were not the dead, the ashes were the names. It was not the people they took, it was the story." In the final records that still bear the name Fornax Aleph, buried beneath vault seals, restricted even to inquisitors without Omega clearance, one figure begins to emerge with unnatural consistency. He is not a general, not a planetary governor, not a traitor with armies behind him. He is a scribal soul, a cataloguer, a failed seer. Jata Elbeth. His name appears not in campaign records but in the margins of lexiconic vaults and heretical citations. He surfaces in the annotations of inquisitorial Psi trackers and in the addenda of librarious Psi chronologies. A scholar of no known origin, appointed to no order, his authority in doubt, his presence inconvenient, and yet, wherever psychic anomalies manifest, his notes follow. Fornax Aleph was his last known destination. There is no formal trail, only fragments, a marginalia in an astropathic archive on Vergast, a transcript fragment from the psychic augurium of Hessia Prime, and a shattered pict plate recovered from the ruins of Hive Perexus, showing a hunched figure inscribing a circle of salt onto a bulkhead wall, eyes weeping ink. It is believed Jata Elbeth walked the subspires of Fornax Aleph alone for 9 days. That number repeats, 9 days in darkness, 9 circuits around the echoing heart of Hive Primaris, 9 broken wards painted in black candle fat on doors that no longer had locks. He did not file reports. He left impressions. Savant psychometrists recovered one such imprint from a plasteel vault beneath the administratum tower of Hive Tertius. Burned into the wall by psychic resonance was a scrawl, neither fully script nor pictogram, a shape of spiral logic. Linguistic archivists later matched its pattern to a form of pre-enuncia, a forgotten proto-language buried beneath inquisitorial black script. It contained no words, only imperatives. One translation, submitted by the now-deceased Ordo Malleus interrogator Horlane Kent, read, "I have found the breath between names. I walk the space where forgetting is born. Do not seek me, do not write me down, do not remember this glyph." After this moment, the references to Jata Elbeth cease. His signature evaporates from psychic lattice work. Inconveniently, so does every attached inquisitorial handler, scribal assistant, and fleet liaison that bore his designation. Everywhere he had passed became thinner, as if thought itself could not hold the idea of him. This phenomenon, the decoupling of cognition from memory, was not new to the Ordo Obscurus. It had names in their oldest treatises: the silence between witnesses, the ninth evacuation, the quiet path. Doctrines that whispered of places in the warp not ruled by demons, but by the entropy of awareness. Domains where forgetting was a force, sharp, surgical, and hungering. Elbeth's writings, those that remained, began to influence Redrake survivors. Scribal errors multiplied. Memory lapses intensified. Commissars found their oaths vanishing mid-utterance. Prayers faltered. Even data slates glitched with words rewritten backwards or replaced entirely by nothing but ellipses. This psychic degradation accelerated in zones where Elbeth was believed to have lingered longest. The worst was beneath Hive Primaris, where in a collapsed shrine known as the Litanarium Vox, Elbeth is said to have performed a ritual that has since been classified Terminatus Noesis. There, within a circle of rusted Aquilus and shattered purity seals, he sat for hours in stillness, eyes open, lips parted but unmoving. One last transmission reached the surface, not his voice, but a Vox recording captured by a servo skull rigged to record psychic radiation. The voice said, "The path is not closed. It was never closed. It is simply unnamed." And then, it listens. After that, Fornax Aleph ceased to produce any signals. The orbital fleet, what remained of it, initiated withdrawal. Jata Elbeth's name was placed on the prohibited archive index. His writings were expunged from Libraria. Those who studied them were exiled, silenced, or quietly discredited. His influence did not spark a war, it sparked a forgetting, and forgetting became the world's final custodian. The end of Fornax Aleph was not a moment. It was not an event. It did not erupt across vid feeds in a blaze of martyrdom, or culminate in a desperate last stand immortalized in stone. It passed instead as a decree, unsigned, unrevealed, unopposed. A quiet notation etched into the folds of Imperial bureaucracy so deep that only silence could find it. The vanishing was made law. No public declaration ever named the world as lost. No ecclesiarchal sermon marked its passing. The Crusade's strategic chart simply adjusted, as if the Fornax cluster had never been there. New deployment corridors were plotted, logistics chains rethreaded, tithe projections rerouted to compensate for the void. Fleet paths drew wide around the sector, not because of danger, because of forgetting. The edict took the form of an omission. It bore no seal, no ink, no title, but its effect was absolute. All Imperial cartography thereafter lists the coordinates of Fornax Aleph as navigatus interdictum. All known warp routes into its heliocentric system were erased from Navy data looms. Astrocartographers who continued to include it in star maps were later executed for data blasphemy. The punishment was never announced, but the act was called by its true name in only one place, a footnote within an Ordo Chronos black crypt, buried beneath the Aegis vault of Ornsworld. The vanishing is in accordance with Segmentum Directive 001. When history itself becomes untrustworthy, it must be excised. Fornax Aleph is not a loss, it is a correction. The Imperium of man has always known the necessity of forgetting. It does not worship ignorance, it wields it. The Labyrinth of Terror, the Chamber of Truths, the Black Vaults of the Adeptus Mechanicus, all are repositories of memory preserved only so they may be hidden. But Fornax Aleph marked a new doctrinal threshold. For here, the loss was not physical. It was not a world conquered, corrupted, or scoured clean. It was a world remembered into non-existence. A place erased so completely that even mourning was forbidden. Even lamentation was heresy. To speak the name was to acknowledge that something had been taken. And what had been taken was not merely people, or data, or stone. It was trust. The vanishing became the blueprint for a category of anomaly the Inquisition would never codify aloud. Other incidents followed. Patterns emerged. Fragments of lost regiments turning up with no origin. Stars found absent from long-range scans. Entire planetary histories missing from Crusade doctrine, with only the outlines of remembered tragedy remaining. Fornax Aleph was the first, but not the last. The final record lies in a shrine constructed in the vault-scarred basilica of St. Athanor the Bound. It is not labelled. It contains no relic. No icons adorn it. Inside, within a warded crystal file, lies a single strip of parchment. On it are written 3 words in scorched ink. We were here. No source is listed. No recipient is named. No date is given. And still, even now, long after the crusade has passed, long after the names have faded, long after silence has settled into the bones of a world that should not be remembered, pilots passing through that empty sector sometimes report a flicker on their aurspecs. An uncharted mass, a drift signature, a whisper on the vox, a name unfinished, and then nothing.